Good afternoon, everybody. Our last lecture today. Last time we meet. After that, you'll just have the final, and that's it. Semester is already pretty much gone. Wow, that was definitely fast. Anyway, I hope that in the near future we'll be able to go back into classrooms, because it is kind of a very awkward, still very awkward way to do it. Nonetheless, let's do our last lecture and try to enjoy it the way it is. So we will finish with Marx today. Obviously, Marx is interesting. We raised some questions last time, so hopefully some of them will get answered today. But let's first refresh a few things about Marx. Hopefully from last lecture you have gotten that and remember that. So what did Marx think religion do to people? What does it do to people? What purpose does it serve? More specifically, what social purpose does it serve? Opium for the people. Remember, he compared it to opium for the people. So that's the function of religion, is people are suffering, people are feeling alienated, they feel despair, and the religion is like an opium. It basically artificially takes their pain away by giving them this false hope that in some afterlife they will be rewarded for all the suffering. So don't worry that today you have no food on a table and you are in pain and you are homeless. After you die, things will be great for you. So that is essentially his explanation of the function of religion. Now, about the real God, though. What is the real God of capitalism, according to Marx? Money, exactly. So the real God is the money. And what is the philosopher supposed to do? How is it different from what has been done by the philosophers before, according to what he says? So philosophers before did what? What did philosophers do? We've been studying it for the whole semester. Yeah, they've been discussing it. They've been talking about it. They've been thinking about it. But what does Marx say we should do? We shouldn't just talk about it. He says we should act. We should actually do something about it. Now that's how he is saying we should change our approach. Instead of talking about it, we should actually do something about it. Not just discuss it, but actually take a proactive position and do something about it. Okay, so historical materialism. That is a rather well-known thing. What does that mean? Basically, Marx explains history from the point of view of materialism, from the point of view of development of productive forces. He says that human beings are rooted in nature, we are part of nature, we are closely connected to nature, so we basically are controlled by nature in physical sense and in all our activity, and therefore material world is what determines our life and what we are. In what sense does it do that? Well, remember, he kind of agrees with Hegel that there is this process, the process of development, what Hegel says spirit, except for Hegel it is completely spiritual. It is a question of self-understanding by the spirit of what is happening. Marx does take his dialectical development idea, but he what he says turns it upside down by, instead of talking about the spirit is not only the human beings but everything around us is also a product of the spirit, he says no, it's the other way around. Everything is material and we are material too. So this is the quote from Marx, "The mystification which dialectic suffered in Hegel's hands by no means prevents him from being the first to present its general form of working in a comprehensive and conscious manner. With him, however, it stands on its head. It must be turned right side up. If you would discover the rational kernel within the mystical shell." So he's saying Hegel is just making it sound too mystical. It is still too close to this kind of religious point of view, whereas we should look at it from the practical, materialistic point of view. So he has an economic interpretation of history. Basically, he says what history is, it's not the play of ideas, it is a play of material forces, forces of production in particular. The economic conditions are the base on which human history is built. So he has this kind of, you can describe his system like this. If we look at it on the board, he says the forces of production is the base. The forces of production is the people who work and the tools they are using. Now that determines in turn relations of production. So how are all these people related to each other in their production? Well, if you look at medieval days, somebody is a lord, somebody is a peasant. The peasant is working, gives part of his whatever he produces to the lord. Now that's a relation of production. If you look at modern society, the worker is working. He produces whatever it is he produces at his factory, and the capitalist takes it away, sells it on the market, and makes profit. That's a relation. So those are relations determined by the forces of production, by the tools. Depending on what tools you have, these relations change. So, for example, in prehistoric or early historic society, what tools did they have? Well, they were hunting mammoths and so on with sharpened sticks or rocks or whatever it is. Those were their tools. This is what they did. That determined what relations they had. What relations could they possibly have in this kind of society? Well, they had probably some sort of a chieftain, right, who was telling them, you will be standing behind that tree right there, and you will yell at the mammoth, so he would run towards this guy, right? So that more or less what they could do. Whereas, of course, in medieval society, again, the relations would be quite a bit different. Why? Because they now had variety of tools. They had a plow. They could produce more, grow some sort of crop. And now you have this landlord, the lord, who actually takes part of that and in exchange allows you to use this land. And then when he takes this, he is able to hire some sort of military warriors who protect him and protect you from other lords. And that's how that system operated. And of course, when that changed again with the advance of capitalism, what happened? What was the most defining moment with capitalism is they started getting machines. The machine production requires you to have a rather large factory. Then you can have maybe 500 machines doing different operations. So now you need workers essentially just do one little thing, stand all day there and just like do one small operation. And that is determined again by the type of production you have, and that in turn determines this relation. So what is on top of all that? This is all what he called structure, economic structure. On top of that would be what he called superstructure, which is art, philosophy, politics, laws, all that stuff which we have in our society is determined by these relations. So when we don't really realize it very much, but what in reality happens is the political system, be it monarchy in the medieval days or democracy today, is determined by this. The laws is determined by this. The philosophy also is determined by this, because this is real productive relation. They cannot easily be changed. They depend on how advanced the society is, what is our scientific ability, and so on, whereas changing it the other way is difficult. Now, by the way, Marx is often seen as like strictly adhering to this economic determinism and saying that completely one-way street. It's actually not necessarily the best way to read him. There are disagreements about that. And some scholars are saying, no, he allows for some way back here too, that in some ways the philosophy, politics, also religion is here, do of course have some effect on our relations of production. And that in turn does have some effect on our forces of production. Because after all, science develops not in a vacuum, it also depends on our ideas. But still, this is more of a prominent kind of influence. This is the leading trend, this materialistic stuff, the actual physical products. So this is again economic interpretation and history, in that this material relations of production, they do kind of determine everything. So once again, so the bottom part, this is the forces or powers, depends how you translate it from German, of production. That includes the means of production, natural resources, tools, machines, and human labor. That's the foundation, that's the bottom part. Then relations of production, that would be all the institutions and practices that govern forces of production. This economic structure, that's like next step up. And then finally what he calls superstructure. Legal, political system, and all sorts of our social consciousness, how do we think about ourselves. This is on top of all that, this is the top part, this is superstructure. This is kind of like dependent on that base, on the actual real structure of reality. So, like I said, often he's called determinist. This is determines the reality. Well, it's open to debate. How much does he actually say it's determined, and what does he mean when he says it is determined? It's not very easy to figure out. Well, part of the problem, obviously, that Marx himself has been dead for about 140 years. So we can't ask him. And if you read his work, some of it you can interpret in a variety of ways. Added to that fact is the problem that he was writing for about 40 years at least, and throughout this time probably changed his views. So his earlier work may present slightly different view from his later work. So for all these reasons, it's kind of difficult to be sure how Marx himself would answer that. Okay, so this is the historical materialism. Now, ideology. We all hear this word ideology. It actually was in operation before Marx himself, but Marx is the one who probably best known for using it. So what exactly is does he call ideology? The superstructure, the stuff on top, represents all the way in which people in a particular age tend to think of themselves and their activities, right? This is what we think we are doing. However, the way in which people think and speak of themselves is not always consistent with what they are and what they actually do. And that you can call rationalization. Rationalization is something that happens on all levels. It happens to each one of us. In fact, as human beings, we engage in rationalization all the time. How does it work? Well, sometimes you may not have control over something, right? And then you try to tell yourself, it's okay. It's actually even better this way. Now that I think about it, maybe I'm better off like that. What are you doing there? Are you really better off? Well, very often it's not the case at all. It's just that, since you cannot change it and you have to somehow live with it, you have to justify to yourself. You have to make sure that you do not feel miserable because of that particular condition, whatever it may be. And so you try to convince yourself that it actually is not that bad, and in fact, maybe even good. This is natural. This is what we do all the time. So that same thing happens on the level of society. The society tries to justify what it does, and it tries to think of itself as doing the right thing. There is hardly any society in history where at least majority wouldn't think what they are doing is the right way to do things. So if you go back into like the period of slavery, you will most definitely find majority of people justifying it and saying, well, slavery is the way to go. That some people are just natural slaves. They should be slaves. Why should we give them freedom, right? They were engaged in rationalization. Similarly, in medieval times, when they had the monarchy and the king was on top, how did they explain that? Did they curse him and say, who is this guy? Why is he in charge of the country? No. They were saying, well, he is God appointed, right? God decided he should be there. God thought that I should be the peasant and work in misery. And God decided that this guy, he should be the king. And he should have everything. So that's actually good, right? It's excellent. That's how things should be. Note that obviously that serves a particular interest of particular people. That is not a neutral point of view. If you try to look at this society neutrally, you may again say, well, wait a minute, you have so many people who are slaves, they have absolutely no rights. How is that the way to go? Or you have this guy in charge who is like completely incompetent and just abusing power, and you think that's okay because he is God appointed, right? So pretty much any society can again be criticized in this way because again any society engaged in some form of rationalization, in explaining that their way of life is better than the other. But let's look at American society today. Do you think we see anything like this in any particular sense? What do you guys think? What type of situation you would say presently exists and finds an explanation, even though it's not exactly how ideally you would think things should be? We definitely do, don't we? But are we? So, for example, wouldn't you agree that having so many homeless people is kind of not very nice? I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't think it's an ideal situation when you have people living on the street. That doesn't seem to me like an ideal society. Yeah, so how do we justify that? Oh, capitalism, freedom. Everybody has equal rights, equal chances. Those people just not good enough. They failed. Is that the case? Well, there's an interesting thing though too, that you pick one person, some Joe or something, and you can say, "Yay, Joe, you are on the street because you were not working hard enough, because you did this wrong and this wrong and this wrong." And you may be right. But when you look at society as the whole, you notice that, of course, there's one country which hardly has homeless people, and another country which has millions of homeless people, and you start wondering, are these people just so lazy here? Or is it kind of like more of the way society works? And perhaps one guy, Joe, maybe he is guilty of being on the street, but if you have millions of people on the street, maybe it's not those millions who are to blame. Maybe it is something more of a, beyond their control there. Similarly, by the way, with like one of those examples, you can't help but think people get different start in life, don't they? Some people are born billionaires, some people are born in a ghetto. How easy it is for a guy who gets $10 million loan from his daddy to become wealthy? Well, I mean, he does have to do some work there, but probably not that much. Now let's look at somebody else who are born to drug addicts' parents in a neighborhood filled with gangs. Now, how easy for this guy to become rich? I mean, I guess it is theoretically possible. He can defy all odds and still somehow get into Harvard and so on. But how easy is that? How easy it is for the first guy, how easy it is for the second guy. Now, you have to be completely blind not to see that they definitely have this very different start in life and they are in a very different situation, right? So the question there is it fair? Because, I mean, when somebody is already 30 years old, we can, of course, blame him and say, you didn't work hard enough, that's why you're on the street. But when somebody is just born and he's like 1, 2, 3 years old, can we blame him for anything? Can we tell him, oh, you live in a ghetto because you didn't work hard enough? I mean, that's preposterous, right? It's a joke. You can't do that. It's not his fault at all. It's not like he was sitting somewhere before he was born and, trying to negotiate with God over who he will be when he is born. That probably is not the case. So that definitely is something we also are guilty of. And Marx says that ideologies in general. What are the ideologies? These are cultural expressions that represent society's self-understanding, the way society thinks about itself, and can often, not always of course, but at least often, distort reality, present a distorted view of reality, which he would call ideological illusion. Why? Because it serves to maintain and justify the power structure. There are people who benefit from that, and those people are the ones who do not want anything to change. They like the system. The system works for them. So they kind of help preserve this ideology because this ideology serves their interests. Previous life he probably didn't do very well. So if you look at again our society, to what degree can you apply this materialistic approach? Well, let's start, for example, with university and college curriculum. Do you see how that can be affected? Now, again, if we go back to this model, slightly different angle, the forces of production, the current system, how does that determine, if you put university education here, how does that determine that? How does, what you make a work market determines college majors and the curriculum? What are we studying? Does it? Do you think it does? Can you see that? Yes. I mean, what question do you guys probably ask yourself and your parents ask before you start on your college path? How marketable this degree is going to be? How much money am I going to be making? Right? But that's what most students think about. But that also determines what degrees you have to offer. We, even at CSN and at all other institutions, periodically rethink what majors we offer. Some majors get kicked out, certain majors get reduced, there's fewer classes. Why? Well, there's no demand. The students don't want it. Why do students not want it? It's not marketable. So again, that base, the economic situation in a country, does of course affect that. Now, how about the religious movements and institutions? That's a little more complicated, especially like if you look at this country, because we do have a religious freedom, right? But historically, if you look at history, there's one interesting example regarding, for example, Protestant movement. When did it begin? Remember, we talked about it early in class. It began in the early 16th century. Why? Why did it begin? Well, one way to explain it is, of course, that people got tired with abuses of the Catholic Church. They were selling all this whatever it is they were selling for making themselves living and so on. But you may also again look at the economic situation. What was the economic situation at the time? Remember, we talked about it. The science moved on. This is exactly the time when capitalism began to form. So Marx would actually say this is why the religious movements began to change in Protestant, because Protestantism is more compatible with capitalism. The Catholic religion and these more traditional ways of religious belief existing before that, they were more compatible with what? With monarchy, with medieval society. But once society started to move towards more of a capitalist relation, it needed different religion. And so it wasn't a religion which determined what was happening after that. It was actually this economic base which determined the religion. The religion itself no longer served the interest of that society. New interests were emerging. Okay, so at any time, Marx would say, ideology is a product of a dominant class. He had this idea of different classes of society, working class, the capitalists, and so on. And he says whichever class is in charge, that is the class which determines what ideology you have. The ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas. The class which has the means of material production in its disposal has control at the same time over the means of mental production, over the ideas. How does this happen? Intellectuals themselves serve those in power. Intellectuals, the people, the writers, the poets, whatever philosophers, whatever you may think, they serve those in power. Well, how exactly do they serve? You may think, well, what, are they like told what to think? No, nobody is told what to think. It works on the following level. The ideas which are accepted by this ruling class and by the society as a whole are the ones which are paid better and accepted better. You all can understand it nowadays also with the way Facebook, for example, work and other social networks. Now, if you post something there, you get a reaction, right? Don't you want to have more likes? Don't you want people to share what you're saying? Everybody does, right? So if you say something and people actually attack you, even your friends say, how can you say that? Would you be posting it again? Probably not, right? You are more likely to post something which people will react positively towards. And it's subconscious. You don't even tell yourself that. But naturally, we all do that because like you start to think, well, maybe I'm wrong here. If I post it and even my friends tell me I'm a douchebag, then maybe I am. Maybe I should like rethink my life position. So that happens also on a higher level with the people who are more have more influence over the society, right? The well-known people. They have millions of subscribers, right? But you also have seen that, didn't you? That if they post something which people do not like, they actually can get into trouble. Sometimes even legal trouble. But more often than not, the people just react against it negatively. And that again serves as this kind of a check on what people say and what they think. So ideologies represent inverted perspective because they distort the reality and reverse the true direction of causality. The true direction of causality is not from ideology to the down to our circumstances. It's from our circumstances and to the ideology. So this is how we typically think of the society and development of society. We think that society has a certain philosophy, right? And that philosophy determines the society. Let's say this is a medieval society. So we have a philosophy that the king is God appointed to rule, and therefore monarchy is the best way to rule the country. Something along the lines of Thomas Aquinas' philosophy, right? He would say natural law. Natural law. Although in Aquinas you already see the little bit of a change when he starts talking about how still, even though the monarch is God appointed, but he got appointed to take care of his people, and if he doesn't, then perhaps he's doing something wrong. But nonetheless, he still is God appointed. So people do not elect him. Then philosophy changes, we get to John Locke. John Locke tells us, oh no, we have a right to select the best government for ourselves, and so society changes. So this is again how we think about it. This is not how Marx says things are working. The way he says things are working, we have an economic system A, let's say this kind of medieval small-scale production and farming, and that's what determines this philosophy A. Now the time passes, new machines are invented, technology changes, economic changes take place, you have an economic system B. Now you have something more of a capitalism, and that changes the way philosophy and society thinks of itself too. So it's not from bottom down, it is from top down, it is from bottom up. That's more or less how it actually works. Natural selection of ideas happens. People who say what society likes to hear, what those in power like to hear, they are more successful. There is, of course, another thing about that. When we talk about revolution, why does specifically revolution happens? The theory of the revolution. So let's look at it here again. What is going on with the revolution? Technology changes. Technology changes, you get new forces of production. But that doesn't change. That is still here. There are, again, people who try to preserve the status quo here. Typically, they are called conservatives. Right? There were conservatives at whole periods in history who are saying, oh, things were so great before. Why do we want to change? We don't want to change. We want to keep it the way it is. Make it great again. It was great 50 years ago. Make America great again. So they tried to keep it here, but this is already moved. So what happens? A disconnect happens. It has to move here. It doesn't want to move here. The society begin to crack because some people demand change, some people try to keep it. They no longer listen to each other. They no longer want to discuss it in an open forum. What happens then? Well, it may get to the point when they take guns, because that's the last argument you can make. If you no longer talk to another person, he's no longer listening to you, well, you can just shoot him, and that kind of solves the problem. At least that is what Marx saying does happen. This is the revolution. When that now has to move here, but it doesn't want to move here, the base already changed. So that if it gets to that point, then there is this violent crash. Then it will still move, but it will move with a lot of bloodshed. It will move with a lot of bad things. So again, this is his theory of revolution. He says it is pretty much inevitable. And if you look at history, he does have a point, because remember, there was a revolution in Great Britain. We talked about it before. 17th century, 1649, they chopped off the head of their king. Why? Well, it's the beginning of capitalism. They were already moving away from monarchy. France followed, 1789. That's the revolution in France. Same thing. They kind of cut up a little bit later, But again, that was time to change. They had to do it. So, revolution in Russia, 1917. Again, absolute monarchy. That was already really late for an absolute monarchy. There was virtually no monarchies left, very few. Germany was also a monarchy, but they still had somewhat of a more of a voice of the people, that monarchy, whereas Russia was an absolute monarchy, and that created the conditions for the revolution. So Marx obviously didn't know about this last one, but he knew about the French one, and he knew about the British one. He explains all this through class conflict, in particular, the different classes, the bourgeois, the capitalist class, defending their interests, trying to preserve the status quo, working class as moving on, and that creates the class conflict. Now, more or less, you can look at the Marxist explanation of history. There's several epochs, primitive communal economic system, that's at the beginning of society. At that point, people were just, basically naked and running around with almost nothing. Then slave system. Why did slave system emerge? Why did it replace this previous system? Well, because they already started having some tools, working on the large plots of land. They needed slaves in order to do that. It was cheap labor, the cheapest labor they can have, and that cheap labor was necessary. People willingly wouldn't do it. So you make somebody a slave, he has to do it. There's really no escape from that. Yeah, it was serving the economic growth at the time. Then it became already outdated. So feudal system in Europe emerged after that because the slave labor was no longer profitable. It became more developed. So feudal system, the small plots of land, small ownership of small plots of land, small landlords, and so on. Then machines brought capitalism in. Capitalism emerged because of the technology. Technology and machines, when they appeared, remember we talked about it last time, the alienation. Why alienation happens? Division of labor. Why does division of labor happen? Capitalism, because if you have a factory with 500 machines, how else are you going to produce? It's no longer feudal system when you can have this artisan making shoes from scratch. He takes a piece of leather and then he himself designs the shoes and then he makes those shoes. This is very expensive way to do it. If you today, if you look at on the market for shoes like that, how much are they going to cost you? A fortune, handmade from scratch. But if you go and buy Nikes in a store today, how much are you going to pay for them? Well, if you're lucky, you can even find something for like $20, right? Why? Capitalist system. It's made with cheap labor. It is made very quickly. There is, by the way, another angle to that. Why the socialism and the communist system in Russia did not work as well. If we go back to 1917, I actually looked back quite a bit at Russian history, at the revolution 1917, which happened almost exactly 103 years ago. What exactly was going on there? The initial idea was to build a communist society. But there's maybe a little known fact, and lots of people don't understand it. Not all Marxists in Russia thought that was a good time for a revolution. There was in February there was a provisional government. It was February 17, first when they overthrew the Tsar. Provisional government was kind of a democratic type of government. Then in November of the same year, communists took over. Communists were the Bolshevik fraction of the Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party. Now, many Marxists were against that. Why were they against that? Because they thought that the base, the economic development, is not there yet. the society did not get through the capitalist stage. Were they right? Well, let's see what happened. Shortly after the revolution, at first they wanted to have worker control. They wanted to have this kind of a communist type of moneyless society. How did that work? Very, very badly, horribly. One thing which happened is the workers took control of the factories, and what did they do? Well, they pretty much stopped working, because now they decided that they can do very little, they can have very small day, they can produce very little, but they can have a very large pay, because they were in control. So it's natural. Why would you work more if you can work less? Why would you be paid less if you can be paid more? So as a result, production almost stopped. On the other hand, the peasants decided that they no longer want to bring their food to the city, because why should they? The city had nothing to offer them. There was nothing produced anymore. There was no factory production. So then the communists tried to extort grain from the peasants by force. That didn't work very well either, because peasants rebelled. So then, in the early 1920s, new economic policy was introduced. New economic policy basically was kind of mini capitalism. They decided to go back to type of capitalist system for small businesses. There were small businesses allowed, private enterprises, but only on a small scale. This is one of the last things which Lenin did, by the way, before he died. Now, within a few years, it turned out it also didn't work very well. Why didn't it work? Well, because you cannot have large-scale production with this type of a system. Large-scale production, you need a lot of people, you need tens of thousands of people gathered together in a factory or some other setting, producing something, and basically, again, doing this cheap manual labor, because that is the tools you have. You can't escape that. If you want to be making stuff on a large scale with capitalist machines, you cannot do it in any other way than the way capitalists do it. So what happened then is essentially the state became the capitalist. The state forced people, now not so much through economic means, but through just brutal force, into those factories by simply taking away their rights. And, well, this is known as gulag, right? The people were basically just taken by force and brought to the factory and told, either you work or we will kill you. Simple as that. So that is when this system was completely rejected. And the reason was because, indeed, with the capitalist level of technology, you cannot jump ahead and create communist society. So essentially, the state became the capitalist. The state created this type of alienation instead of the multiple small producers. What was the state? Who was the state? They were saying it's people are in charge. What people? The Communist Party was in charge. How did people join the Communist Party? Well, the other members of the party would recommend whoever they think is worthy, and this is how you could join it. But of course you would join it at the very bottom, and in order for you to move up in that system, you had to completely obey those in charge. In particular, in the early years it was Comrade Stalin, and then there were other leaders, and they had complete control of the party and of the system. So it was again type of a monarchy in a sense, with that person being in full control. So you may make a very good argument that there was never any socialism there and there was never any communism. And that is one of the reasons the system collapsed, because it was just this type of capitalism which essentially was even worse than the capitalism you see in Western countries. It was more oppressive, it was more inhumane. It was saying the right words and claiming to use Marxism, but again, whether it was Marxism Well, a lot of people would disagree. Now, Marx, of course, is saying that capitalism, for this particular development of forces of production, is the best system. But, in the same time, it's not, of course, the ideal system. One of the problems with capitalism is that labor theory of value, which says that all products are created by people who actually work, and yet in capitalism you have people who own capital, who do not produce anything, and they just basically take surplus value from the workers and accumulate it in their hands, so that way they run the society and that way they prosper. In Capital, he goes over the detail of trying to prove that. Did he actually prove that? Well, it's hard to say, because it is a very slippery thing. To figure out whether or not the worker is truly exploited is not that easy, not very straightforward. But if you take an eagle's eye view of the system, you can kind of see that it is peculiar that there are certain people who have billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars, and many of them, even if they work, they certainly don't work that hard. But in the same time, there are people who are in complete poverty, who work day in, day out, and can't make a living. So naturally, that would seem like there's some sort of a problem going on. Not everything is right. Marx would say that the problem which is going on is the surplus value has been extracted by those who exploit them. So how does he say the system will then collapse? What would lead to the revolution? Well, again, he uses this Hegelian dialectic, looking at the thesis being capitalist system, which is, of course, what we have today. A small class of people own and control major forces of production as their private property, and employ workers who have no economic resources but their own labor to sell. And it works rather well until there's tension, which, again, conflict and opposition starts to emerge. One of the contradictions which you can see there already is that the ideology of this system is based on individualism. However, this organized group of people, the workers, is created. The workers develop into the class. But that, of course, in itself would not have created a problem. What creates a problem? Well, let's actually look at a little bit again at the current situation, and hopefully you guys can see that a little bit better. So with all this stuff in mind, okay, so today, one of the biggest problems, why many people voted for Trump? Why was he elected? What was going on? Do you guys remember? What was he saying in 2016? Well, he was saying many things, but economically. Rings a bell at all? What is going on with the jobs? The jobs are leaving. There's fewer and fewer jobs in this country. No, that's just a slogan, but he was talking to people in Pennsylvania in particular, in other states, and saying that we are losing jobs. The jobs are going to China. Why are they going to China? There's a very simple answer. Chinese workers make about $500 a month. How much American workers are making? Well, hell, a lot more. You have to pay them around $2,000 at least, right? A month. It's a minimum. Some make more than that. What would you rather pay if you're a capitalist? 500 or 2,000? A funny question, right? The answer is rather obvious. You would pay 500. So, do you want to bring the job back? No, you don't want to bring it back. Why would you bring it back? You'll make less profit. It's a question of profit. It makes perfect sense. If I own my own business, I'm running, and let's say I employ 1,000 people, I pay them $2 million. Wouldn't I rather move it to China and employ 1,000 people and pay them $500,000? It's 1.5 million difference. I want 1.5 million. That's pretty nice profit. So that's what is happening. So one of the ways he said we can try to bring it back is introduce the tariffs or whatever. So yeah, you may introduce the tariffs of, let's say, $1,500. Of course, what would then automatically happen, the products will get more expensive because they are cheap. Those cheap Nikes for $20 because they're made by workers who paid $500 a month. If the workers are paid $2,000 a month, those Nikes not going to be $20. And if you ever look for products made in America, you will see majority of them are very expensive. Hell a lot more expensive. But that's not even the biggest problem, because the same capitalist still wants his profit, right? Okay, suppose he brings the jobs back. What does he do then? Again, you can see that happening. More technology, more robots. Why would I then employ 1,000 people? Fine, you force me to bring it back, I'll bring it back. I'll employ 100 people. The rest will be done by the robots. Why? Well, because it's just not profitable to me to pay so much money. I would rather invest in machines. There's better technology. So that is actually the essence of it. The technology does kind of push away those manual jobs. They simply will have to go. And the reason why they're transferred to China now is just because in China the labor is still cheap, so it still makes sense. When it is a trade-off, rather than buying expensive machines, the capitalist would employ cheap labor. But if he no longer can employ cheap labor, he'll buy the machines. Because ideally, for him, that makes more sense. So the machines will definitely win this competition. There's no way you can employ people if their jobs can be done by the machines. And that is the essence, again, of what Marx is saying. Now, once you have new technology, once this new technology starts replacing people, you will have a problem. That problem will be fewer workers employed, more products produced. Who's going to be buying those products? The workers have no money. What is the solution here? Smaller companies going bankrupt. Then you will see monopolization, more bigger corporations. Again, do we see it right now? You bet. This is exactly what is happening. There's more and more monopolization of the market. Very often you don't see that. Why not? Because you have different brands. But then if you find out, there's one company which owns several different brands. And you think you buy in different brands. Oh, I don't want that one anymore. I'll buy this one. But they all come from the same corporation. They all owned by the same corporation. So the corporation is laughing at you like, yeah, whatever. Don't buy this one, buy that one. We don't care. It's still ours. If you look at the cell phone market, that's actually a good example. When I lived in UK, they have several providers. You know how much I was paying for a cell phone? £10 a month. It's about $13. I had a plan with almost unlimited everything. How much is cheapest cell phone plan here? It's like at least $40 and you get almost nothing. If you want everything, it's like $100. So it's almost 10 times as much. Why? Well, because they almost monopolize the market. There are like 3 or 4 companies, but even they, several of them owned by the same corporation. So essentially you have almost no competition. And whatever competition there is, they probably have a collusion there in that they all keep these high prices and nobody wants to lower them. That's the simple explanation. And by the way, I don't know if you're aware of that, but in communications, especially in stuff like internet, cell phone, they can provide it almost for free. There is one large investment, because when you build the structure, when you build those towers, you have to invest a lot of money. After that, it becomes almost free, because, well, you have to maintain it, but that doesn't cost very much. They can easily give you monthly fee of like $1 and still make profit. But why should they? if they can charge you 100. If you can pay 100, they'll charge you 100. If you could pay 1,000, they would charge you that, but then if they started charging you that, you'd probably stop using cell phone. So of course they're not going to do it, simply because you won't be able to pay. But not because, I mean, again, if they are after profit, it makes perfect sense. Why should they charge you any less than they can? They will charge you the maximum. So this is what is going on. We have more and more people unemployed because the system no longer is requiring that cheap labor. The cheap labor is not in demand. More and more of it is replaced by the machines. More and more of it is pushed out by the competition. But you still have the people. So what are these people supposed to do? They have no money. They have nothing. What? So do you guys see that stuff going on here in America? Do you see any of that? Well, we definitely have at least one thing, and that is jobs are going away. And again, Trump promised to bring them back. He keeps on bragging how he brought them back. If you actually look at economic statistics, that's not happening. And with the COVID crisis, it's getting even worse, because now you can see what's going on in the market in general. Lots of these service jobs, restaurants, hotel industry, casinos, they are going away. Whether they will come back or not, well, we can hope for that, but we don't know. There's still some jobs in delivery, like Amazon and stuff are hiring, but what are they going to be delivering and to who? That's another question. Somebody still has to be working, right? Somebody still has to be making money in order to buy this stuff to be delivered. And how that works, well, we will have to see in the long run. Anyway, so what Marx is saying is that antithesis to the capitalist thesis would be proletariat. That would be those workers who lost their jobs and who lost their income. So you will have more and more of them. The size of the proletariat will increase. More and more people will be destitute. They will elect maybe Trump one more time. It again is not going to work for them. Then what are they going to do? They will not elect him anymore. They will take matters into their own hands. So this increased misery cannot be resolved through tariffs or whatever other trickery which he suggests. It can only be resolved if you change the system, if you make it more distributive, more fair, and if you find a way to bring the resources back from those few people who have everything to the millions who have nothing. Because if you look again at the trend in this country over the past 100 years, like richer people getting richer and richer, poor people getting more and more poor. There's so much talk about it. It's almost like a given. Everybody knows this is exactly how it is. Poor people, if you look at how much wages of the lowest paid workers grew over the past 30, 40 years, very little. Almost nothing. If you adjust it for inflation, it's almost the same money you are paid doing your job as you did in the 70s. If you look at the top 1%, they're making a lot more. Why? Because they own all these factories who are now producing in China. So they actually are making much better profit now than they did in the 70s. In the 70s, they had to pay their workers good salary here. Now they don't. Now they can exploit those Chinese workers all they want, pay them very little amount of money. I saw a documentary actually on the working conditions in China. It is absolutely brutal. Did you know that many of these factories, first of all, employers who work there live in dorms. They do not only do they not own houses, they don't even rent anything. They live in dorms, about 10 people per room, and this kind of communal living. Another problem in China is they have almost no restrictions on pollution. When they had Olympic Games in Beijing, they had to shut down all the factories around Beijing for 2 months. Why? because otherwise it was impossible to breathe. The air there is so full of pollution, you cannot breathe. That's actually one of the reasons they're doing so well with the virus, because they were wearing masks even before the COVID started. They simply couldn't breathe without a mask. So why? Well, again, because of all this production, because if you introduce some sort of environmental protection, you actually have to reduce production. It becomes costlier. This is what is happening in this country, right? This is another reason why Trump wants to remove that. He keeps on removing those environmental protections, because that brings business back. Well, of course business will come back. If they can pollute now, if you want to have an air like in Beijing, no problemo. They'll be making this rubber and other stuff here, and we will be breathing this horrible air. That will make the production cheaper for sure. If you can move those workers from individual houses into dorms, if you can pay them $500, they'll move back, no problem. That they will be happy to. I mean, the question, of course, is, do you want American workers to live like that? Do you want this kind of environment? And if you do, then by all means, you can try that. I don't know if even that would work, because it's just too much of a difference in terms of how much you can exploit Chinese workers compared to American workers. In China, they have huge number of people who lived in their villages growing rice. This is horrible lifestyle. For them, even moving into a dorm is a huge improvement. These people are actually happy. They paid $500 a month. They live in a nice, clean dorm. Now, if you do that to American workers, I don't think they'll be that happy about that. I have my doubts about them being happy to this kind of lifestyle. This is not exactly how we live in this country. So I doubt they would ever want the job if the job comes with these kind of conditions. So Marx says the revolution then is inevitable. It will happen for sure, but it will happen when the situation gets to the point when the tension is already insurmountable. And then the workers will take matters into their own hands. They will take control. And that will happen, according to Marx, inevitably. This will be the crash. Now, do you guys think the downfall of capitalism is inevitable? Let's do a poll here. Let me see what you think. Do you think it's inevitable? Do you agree with Marx on that? Okay, Destiny, you want to? All right. Okay, almost even split. 4 people don't think it's inevitable. 3 people think that it is inevitable. Well, naturally, there is a second question related to that. Does it have to be violent? I mean, many people would agree with Marx in the sense that, yeah, perhaps it's not the perfect system yet, but do we have to have revolution? Do we need to have violence? Or maybe we can wake up and see that the situation can be remedied in some other way, such as, for example, through higher taxes, more of the wealth distributed to these poor people, maybe better education, giving people better chances at advancing to occupations which do not require factory production. Because let's face it, it does seem pretty inevitable that eventually those factory jobs will go away. Sooner or later we'll have robots. Okay, we already have them. Manual jobs will go. Whether or not, well, if you want to do something with your hands, you obviously can still do it, but this type of factory, especially the conveyor belt type jobs, which they have now when they make cars and so on, they will go away. It's a matter of time. Maybe not in the next 10, 20 years, but it will go away. And then the question will be what to do with all these people. We have 320 million now. We may have double that 20 years later. What are they going to do? What are they going to occupy themselves with? That's the big question, right? So Marx is saying that the synthesis of this will be socialism. The socialism is when the state will take over the means of production. And note that the idea though is, and again, this is why it did not work in Russia and in many other socialist countries. You have to have means of production advanced to the level when you don't need people any longer doing these manual jobs. So again, to put it bluntly, you need to have robots. When robots and machines will work and you maybe have 1 or 2 people running the factory and that's it, naturally then the system will have to change. It's inevitable, because then either you will have 2 people who have everything and everybody else will have nothing, or you have to find some way to redistribute it, because there's just no other way to solve it. You know, those billions of people in the world, they will need to do something. And if they no longer required to do manual jobs, then they will need to do something else. So, ideal state of the entire thing for Marx is communism. He's saying communism is inevitable. It is a dictatorship of the proletariat. That's the first stage, when proletariat or people who have nothing will take control. And he says that will lead to this society which have no more private ownership of means of production, and then that will resolve the struggle. That will resolve this, and it will lead to this ideal society. He says very little about it. He's actually not specific. He says, I can't describe that in detail. There's virtually no detail. So what does he say? He says it is the ascent of man from the kingdom of necessity to the kingdom of freedom. You may say, whoa, how is that freedom? Well, what he means is you no longer have to work for living. You no longer have to feel this alienation. You no longer have to slave for somebody else. Does it mean you will do nothing? Of course not. It does not mean you will do nothing. It means you will select what you do and how you do it. So he still thinks that it is necessary for us as human beings to produce something. But you can think of it in this way. You can decide that you will be, I don't know, making shoes or whatever, and you will be doing it from scratch yourself. You will start with like a piece of leather, and then you will create, and each pair of shoes will be different. It will be like a work of art. And then you will not even sell it, but you will be giving it away to other people, and they will be giving to you what they are making. How can that work? Well, remember, on the background, we have those factories running on robots, producing everything you need, so you actually have plenty of stuff. You do not have to worry about food, shelter, and stuff like that. Now, that seems like too good to be true, but this is the idea. The idea is that we should be able to get to this stage, and this is when we finally going to be truly free, because we will have no bosses, we will have nobody to tell us what to do. We will be just expressing ourselves freely throughout our life, and that will not resolve all the conflicts, but it will resolve the most important conflict, that conflict over the material production. Now, there's another thing to mention. All of us, if we think about how the society we want to have, can take a lesson on that sense from rather modern philosopher John Rawls. I don't know if you guys ever heard of John Rawls, but that could be actually a good moment to mention him. So John Rawls had this thought experiment. He called it the vial of ignorance. The vial of ignorance works like this. Imagine you are not born yet. Right? You are not born yet. And you can structure yourself the world you will be born into, but you don't know who you will end up being. So who you will be in this world is kind of like a lottery. You can end up being anybody. But how the world works, you can set it up yourself. So suppose you will set it up so that there are rich people and there are poor people. But what if you're born poor? Suppose you set it up so that there's racism. But what if you're born black? Suppose you set it up so that the men are in charge and women are subjugated. What if you're born woman? Right? So if you think about that, that actually tells you that how you want this world to be, that is how you should try to make it. Because the part of the problem for all of us, oh, we already are like white or, I don't know, man, and so on. It's hard to think about it like, oh, what if I was a woman? I'm not, okay? So I am actually enjoying that. Men are dominant and I'm a man. White people are dominant and I'm white. So why should I change anything? But the other side of it is, if you have this kind of tensions, the racial tensions, the tensions between poor and rich, that can affect you greatly too. You may be benefiting from it now, but if society is not fair, sooner or later revolution can happen, and then somebody will come and take everything away from you and kill you. And you certainly don't want that. So it is in our best interest to set the society in a way that those tensions are minimized. What do you mean, how can minority independently try to live how they want to? Which minority are you talking about? Why would minority live independently? I'm not sure I'm understanding your question. No, yeah, well, she should reject racism. And of course, but wait a minute, of course for a black woman it's natural that she would reject racism. The problem is not that black people are rejecting racism. The problem is white people don't want to reject it. Isn't that the problem? So it's not so much on black people to reject racism, it is on white people to reject it. So, of course, those people who benefit from the unfairness should be the one rejecting it. Because the other side rejected it already. It's just they don't have means to actually do very much about it. So the idea is, again, you should act not like try to preserve your own interest the way you small-mindedly may think they are preserved, but you should try to think of it in terms of everybody. How fair is it to everybody, to other people? That is, we all interrelated, and that amazingly will also make you better off. If they're better off, you're better off. And if you try to, because this blanket, like, if you try to pull it from them, they can pull it back from you. And then nobody gets the blanket. So that's the idea. Ideally, again, we should try to set the society in a way which is best and most fair for everybody. Well, still we have to okay, let's skip this discussion. Let's just, because we are running out of time now, I want a few more minutes to mention a few more things. So we can go back to Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, which do have their own answer to that. And their own answer to that is, again, remember, especially Nietzsche, we did not talk as much about him, but Nietzsche would say, this is just how human beings are. We will never get rid of these contradictions. Humans are not equal. Some of them are stronger than others, some of them are smarter than others, and Nietzsche says, that's okay. That is what it should be. Some people dominate the others, and that's okay. Other people try to dominate them, and that's okay. So Nietzsche would say that that is the life. That is what it is to be human. So there's nothing we can do about that. No matter how hard we try to make society all equal, all fair, it will never be all equal and all fair. It's just going to indeed switch this blanket from one side to the other side, and instead of these people being miserable, some other people will be miserable. Is he right? Is he wrong? That is philosophical question. That is, of course, each one of us decides for ourselves. I don't think I can give you guys answers to that. Unfortunately, this is not the kind of class which ends up with everything settled. We are done now. We know how to live and how to set our life. We don't. This is just gives you some tools to understand what is going on, but how you use these tools is up to you. So, yeah, some people are more dominant, and perhaps Nietzsche would say they deserve it. They should be more dominant because they are better than others. They are smarter, they are stronger, and Nietzsche would say stronger people should be better. They should have better piece of the pie because they're stronger. He would say that's just natural part of life. Whether we can achieve fairness or not, well, so far we haven't, so let's see how it works. Okay, so this is basically all we have. We have just a couple of minutes. So did you guys enjoy the class or not? I want to ask you with the poll. Yes or no? Just your honest opinion. Okay, well, Mindy hasn't answered yet, but everybody else seemed to enjoy it. That's good. So what would you do differently? Well, you don't have to answer right now, but remember there is actually this evaluations. So do the evaluations. I do get to read them like about 10 days after class is finished, after I submit the final grades. So you may actually want to put whatever concerns you have or whatever. I know one of the big things, of course, we're doing it online. I hate doing it online. I would much rather do it in classroom myself, but unfortunately it's out of my hands. We are banned from even entering CSN buildings. Like I said, you have to like apply 2 weeks in advance if you want to go there for 5 minutes, and there's nothing I can do about that. I would love to do it back in the classroom, even with a mask if I had to, but I can't. There's nothing I can do. They are not letting us do this. Well, Lisa, I'll try to grade them as soon as I can. I'm already through about half of this class, and I'm done with the other class. So within the next few days, like I said, I will definitely finish it by the time you take the final. Few words about the final too before we conclude. So final will be on Monday, December 7th, but I will open it at midnight, right? Right at midnight between Sunday and Monday, you will be able to take it. If you want to take it at like 1 a.m., be my guest. It will be open throughout the entire day Monday until 11:59 p.m. So you should take it during that time. What happens if you still miss it? Well, it will still be available on Tuesday, but with 10% penalty, right? The reason I do it is because I know there's always 1, 2, 3 students who for whatever reason don't take it when it's supposed to be taken, and I don't want to fail them in class just because they did not take it on time. But I will take 10% penalty just to be fair from people who take it later, and it absolutely has to be done by 11:59 on Tuesday because I have to eventually grade you guys, submit the final grades. So review questions, yes, I'll post them. I'll try to do it tonight. The review questions as usual will be based on the lectures. Remember now, the review questions will only cover about half of the final. The half of the final comes from first 2 exams. It literally will be questions from the first 2 exams, the ones you already answered. So just look back at the previous reviews, remember what you answered there, what did you get, you think you may have gotten wrong, and so on. That's where half of it will come. You need to know this stuff too. If you already feel like you were well prepared back then you don't need to do much. But if you did poorly before, you may want to go back and look at those 2 reviews, which are still available, by the way. Then, of course, your material is a lot bigger, but nonetheless, the exam will be still 30 questions, but it will be on everything. So there will be, like I said, questions from the first exam, questions from the second exam. And only about half of it will be new stuff from the stuff we did after Kant, because we only covered very little after Kant. More time than till Monday? No. What do you mean more time? Or more than 45 minutes for the exam? No, I think 45 minutes is plenty. I don't want you to look it up. I want you to prepare for it. You have to be prepared ahead of time. That's the thing. If I give you more time, I know what will be happening. You'll be looking it up as you go along. And that's not how exams are supposed to work. If you want to prepare, you have to go through all the questions. You have to prepare some sort of a review for yourself, have all the answers ready, and then you can do it in 15 minutes. But if you don't want to do it, then you're just not playing by the rules. And remember, when I do it in class, students have no notes whatsoever. You actually have to keep it in your head. You guys have all the notes, so you already have huge advantage. I can't make it better than that. We already are doing way too well on those exams. Actually, averages in the 80s, 80+%, that's way too high. I mean, I can't give everybody an A. So that will be crazy if I just make it way too easy. It's fairly easy as it is. and lots of people already getting an A in class. So you have to like remember that I can't give everybody an A. If I do, I'll get trouble too, because this is actually, we're not supposed to do that. There's supposed to be a distribution. Some students do better than others, and it's also more fair because some of you do more work than others. And so if everybody gets an A, then people who do more work will say, why did I bother? I could have been like this guy. He was watching TV all the time. So no, that's not how it works. But I will then add extra credit too. So if you have extra credit, I'll add it to the final. And lots of people will get an A. Lots of people will get good grades. The only people who will fail the class are people who really did almost nothing. Right? So the class is not that difficult. Okay, yeah. Sometimes, you know what? Sometimes they are not that redirected. I check my Gmail account hell a lot more often than the official account because all my emails go to Gmail. But sometimes it may end up in a spam folder or something, and then I don't even know it's there. So yeah, I will double check. If you, for whatever reason, don't get a response from me within 24 hours, just send me another email or another message. It's hard to keep track, especially since I have 150 students and I get all sorts of messages, emails. Sometimes I may just miss something. Okay, so that's all the time we have. We're already over time. Again, I hope you guys enjoyed the class. Make sure prepare for the final. And, well, maybe we'll meet again if you take another class with me in the future or something. Otherwise, thank you very much, and that is all. That is it. We are done.